From the library of the New York Stock Exchange at the corner of Wall and Broad Streets in New York City, you're inside the Ice House, our podcast from Intercontinental Exchange on markets, leadership, and vision in global business. The dream drivers that have made the NYSE an indispensable institution of global growth for over 225 years. Each week, we feature stories of those who hatch plans, create jobs, and harness the engine of capitalism. Right here, right now at the NYSE and at ICE's exchanges and clearinghouses around the world. And now welcome inside the Ice House.
One of the themes of this podcast has been how technology has rapidly changed the nature of business, both here at ICE with markets, trading, data, and now mortgages, and across the 2,400 listed companies that call the New York Stock Exchange home. In mere months, it seems, innovations go from the theoretical to the ubiquitous. Let me give you an example. Almost 200 episodes and 3 years to the day, we spoke with then Verizon Business CEO Tami Erwin, who has recently retired. At the time, the main topic of that conversation was the coming impact of 5G, including the promise of better interior connectivity and the coming availability of private 5G networks. At the time, Verizon Communication had piloted 5G networks in 36 cities with ambitious expansion plans despite the ongoing pandemic. Our guest today, Kyle Malady, the current CEO of Verizon Business, will give us a full update on the company's progress towards that goal and far beyond. But I can tell you that today, I have 5G coverage from my house in the suburbs through my entire commute, which includes a ferry ride across the Raritan Bay and into the steel and concrete walls of the New York Stock Exchange. Our conversation with Kyle Malady on Verizon Communications' success building its 5G network, keeping our nation's telecommunications fast and reliable, plus what technologies will make the same leap as 5G over the coming months, will be right after this break.
Connecting the opportunity is just part of the hustle.
Opportunity is using data to create a competitive advantage.
It's raising capital to help companies change the world.
It's making complicated financial concepts seem simple.
Opportunity is making the dream of home ownership a reality.
Writing new rules and redefining the game.
And driving the world forward to a greener energy future.
Opportunity is setting a goal
and charting a course to get there.
Sometimes the only thing standing between you and opportunity is someone who can make the connection.
At ICE, we connect people to opportunity.
Our guest today, Kyle Malady, is the Executive Vice President and CEO of Verizon Business, part of Verizon Communication, that's NYSE ticker VZ. Previously, Kyle served as Executive Vice President and President of Verizon's Global Networks and Technology team. Kyle began his career as a cell site technician for NYNEX Mobile Communications, which became Bell Atlantic Mobile, and ultimately, through transactions, Verizon Wireless. Welcome, Kyle, inside the Ice House.
It's great to be here, Peter. Thanks for having me.
So my commute, which I just gave you the inner workings of, actually also takes me by Bell Works, which was known as Bell Labs until recently. It was where some of the earliest breakthroughs in cellular and other technology happened. Has Verizon continued this sort of spirit of a centralized innovation at Basking Ridge, or does it have a decentralized innovation network now?
No, I think it's more decentralized, but I'm glad you bring up Bell Labs. I mean, I started my career working really closely with Bell Labs on new technology back in the day, in the late 80s, early 90s, and I know exactly what you're talking about. And Whippany as well is not there anymore. That campus is gone too. Kind of sad for me because the Bell Lab, what an institution. You would walk in there, and you can walk down the hallway and you'd see, 4 Nobel Prize winners having lunch. It was something to behold. But since the breakup of the Bell system, things have changed. And that kind of R&D spending is no longer possible by companies like ours. We do spend a lot of money on R&D, but we rely on others in the ecosystem, and we work with them to develop new technologies and the like. So it's much more decentralized than it used to be back in the day.
Yeah, and when it was centralized, I remember we used to take school trips to Bell Labs, and that was the company's ability to basically introduce prospective employees to the different jobs. What was your introduction to the business?
So that's interesting. My introduction was I actually started at a predecessor company to Verizon basically in high school. And then during college, I'd work during the summers, and I was exposed to the paging technology and something called IMTS, which is even technology before what we call now 1G, which was analog AMS telephony. So I was working in this stuff even before I went to college, and I just fell in love with it. And remember back in the day when you had a cell phone, it was basically a huge transceiver in the trunk of your car, and it cost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. And so I had a front row seats from those days to what you see today with what we all have in our pockets. So it's been an amazing ride. I'm glad I kind of fell into it a little bit, luckily, but I'm also glad I made the choice to get into this industry. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, even to this day, whenever we do renovations in the 11 Wall building, we open up a wall and there'll always be that 9X logo will be on some old equipment we haven't touched in decades.
There you go. New York Telephone too, right? Exactly.
You mentioned 1G, and I've heard you describe on another podcast, your career spans all the Gs from 1 to 5. How did your career develop as this technology became more ubiquitous and faster and more reliable?
You know what? I mean, I was lucky because I'll tell you, I made the choice to get into this kind of wireless technology really early on. I just found it fascinating. And the technology just keeps evolving. It keeps growing. It keeps changing. And as an trained engineer, it's the best of all worlds, right? You get to learn, you get to be on the cutting edge of new and developing tech. Not all of it works. So I'll be honest with you, I probably had more failures in tech than successes. But the thing is, you get to work on all these things and help have an impact on it. And what's really awesome is when you do get things put together in the right way, and then you could see the commercial market use it and use it in ways that are super helpful for society. And that's really fulfilling as an engineer and a business person.
Yeah, and when we had Tammy on 3 years ago, she had talked about using Verizon's technology to move your whole company remote. It was at the very beginning of the pandemic. And prior to your current role, you acted as the CTO, a role previously held by the current Verizon CEO, Hans Vestberg. How did running your own company's technical operations help you better understand the needs of your client? You're sort of the president and operator.
No, that's why I'm liking my new job here. So Tammy retired, Sampath took over for a little bit, and now Hans asked me to take on this role. It's frankly a short putt from what I was doing before to now the role I'm in now, because the people I'm talking to, a lot of them say in the large enterprise sector or in the public safety sector. I've been supporting and working with them on technology for years. And I was also a procurer of the technology, right? So being on that side of the house, now that I can come over here, now I can sit down and have a conversation with the CIO and talk about really what's your trouble? What issues do you have? And I can go back into the things that I've known that I have knowledge about for the last 30 years and help them, help steer them and help guide them and counsel them on, hey, here's maybe some things you can think about. And that works out really well, when we're trying to partner with, let's face it, I think we serve 99% of the Fortune 500. So a lot of the people on your stock market, we help move their business forward every day. And
I wanted to kind of dive into that a little bit. You mentioned, you have the background in engineering, you really grew your career through the development of the technology. How have you been able to transition those skill sets to now, you also are the end manager for tens of thousands of employees. And what are some of the lessons you've learned along the way?
I think it's, once again, a credit to the company. I've had great bosses over my years here, and the company really gives you the ability to move around and learn new things. We have a very, very large company, and we're involved in so many different technologies and business segments. It's really a great place to learn. And I've had, great bosses. Sometimes they'd ask me to go do something I didn't necessarily think was the best idea. But at the end of the day, they were thinking out more about my career maybe than I even was, because they were giving me opportunities to learn and to see new parts of the business. And really just over the years, I've always had the core and the tech and the products and the networks and all that kind of thing. But then I was exposed a lot to finance, M&A, business development, marketing, all different parts, all different facets of business. And I've just learned and picked up from all those experiences to where I am today. And then, also along the way, you learn to be a better manager. Everybody has to start somewhere, and you learn by doing, right? You can, sure, you can take courses to be a great manager, but you learn by doing and working with people and understanding what motivates people, understanding what demotivates people, and getting everybody going in the same direction. So it's really, for me, it's just been a great career of getting to try different things, learning different things, and then experimenting and working with people. I've been lucky through my career here.
Hard work and luck is sort of the story of most people we talk to. And I want to use this as an opportunity to educate our audience. I think most of our listeners are familiar with the little thing on the corner of their phone that says, either 5G or LTE, or if they're in the middle of nowhere, perhaps a 3G. But can you explain what the spectrum pipeline is and why that's so important to getting the speeds across this country?
So I also sit on the Industry Trade Association, which is called CTIA. I'm on the board of that. And that's an area where, listen, us, AT&T, T-Mobile, we all compete fiercely on a daily basis. But there's certain things that we come together on and, we lobby for. And one of them is a spectrum strategy, an ongoing spectrum strategy. If you look at if you step back for a little while and you learn about the cellular industry, basically the thing you need the most is what we call the spectrum. That's the airwaves that we operate the cell phones on. That's like fundamental. That's the basics of what we need to do. And over the years, it's kind of been piecemeal putting, the government putting piecemeal parts of the spectrum together so we can make an industry that's, trillions of dollars in economic value to the United States. But what's happening now, the industry doesn't have a clear path to more spectrum. And we need the government really to step up and figure out a way. How do we have a long-term spectrum plan so we can continue to innovate and work with our partners on research and development, and what's the next new groundbreaking technology that we can bring to our economy and to the, our citizens of the United States. So we need a lot of work on that. It's kind of in a quagmire right now. And then we see countries like China that have a long-term plan. And, that worries some of us because you brought up Bell Labs to start. I mean, the United States has enjoyed a technology leadership position in communications technology for 100 years. And if we allow others around the world to take that mantle, that's not a good thing for us from where I sit. So we need the government and people are working on it, but we need the government to accelerate work on how do we get a good, solid spectrum pipeline going for the industry for the next couple decades.
And you mentioned the economic side of it, but also, the government depends on you and the things you provide. It has a major role in the economy, but also infrastructure. Last month you were down in D.C. bringing your 5G innovation session tour to the nation's capital. How are you working with government agencies, not just on getting the spectrum available to you, but also providing the support they need to do what they do?
Oh, that's where we shine. Listen, we'll be working with the government to make sure, the whole industry to make sure we have spectrum. It's critical. But listen, the day-to-day operations and working with local, state, federal, first responders, it's what we do, right? We really take pride in making sure we have reliable communication. So when, first responders need to make sure they're communicating, we're there for them. And you can see it in any issue that goes on, man-made or natural kind of disasters. Verizon shows up. We show up in a big way. We invest heavily to make sure that when our customers need it most, whether it be a civilian or a first responder, we're there for them. We take that responsibility very seriously. We invest in it and we spend time practicing it, responding, and tabletop exercises and the whole bit. So it's something that's really kind of dear to our heart, and it's been there since day one of Verizon, I got to say. You
personally are a member of the President's National Security Telecommunications Advisory Committee, which is a bit of a mouthful to say. But when you're meeting with Biden's White House, you mentioned disasters, natural and man-made. What are the top things you're trying to bring to the table for them that they need to think about as we face, climate and other disruptions?
Listen, I'm honored to be a part of that group. It is a mouthful. We just call it NSTAC. It's a good cross-section of people. Really it's more around the telecommunications kind of security. So we spend a lot of time on cybersecurity, making sure we're all weighing in on where we see threats for our infrastructure. Because, obviously it's critical infrastructure that we run. And, kind of best practice is always to be sharing what's the newest and latest thing bad guys are trying to do. And then how do we help the White House come up with policy that will make it easier for the industry to maintain our reliability and make sure we are thwarting, bad actors. And we're all doing it in unison. So it's a great group of people. I'm honored to be on it. But the mission is really to make sure we're sharing best practices and we're giving the White House, the real inside scoop on what needs to be done to make sure we can secure our infrastructure in the United States.
Yeah, and you think about, the White House has the ability to call on people like you, call on the military to do that. But there's also, in an increasingly digital economy, everyone is more vulnerable to cyber criminals. And I want to sort of narrow in on your smaller clients and your small businesses. How is Verizon Business educating and equipping small businesses to make sure they're safe and their businesses are operating with modern technology, but with the safety that they need to operate?
We have different things we do based on the attributes of your firm, let's say, or consumer too, because we do the same thing. We think about the same way for consumer. We have large institutions that are targets a lot of times of, big kind of hacking organizations trying to get in there, trying to steal data, trying to cause them problems. A lot of times doing something called DDoS to shut them down, which is kind of denial of service attacks on their infrastructure. Those kind of things, we have capabilities that are kind of unmatched that we can take care of those things. But we think about it all the way down to a business that might have a connection with us that has 3 employees. We make sure that we can work with them so they can secure their endpoint connections with the latest and greatest software and technology. And then we can also monitor their connections to make sure nothing, malfeasance isn't happening. So while we don't do it at the same scale we do with large enterprises, it's still the same idea. If we can make sure that our edges are secure and people have devices that are secure, then that makes the overall network more secure. So we spend a lot of time, if we see individual customers, we can tell if they have malware because something may go on the network, and we can let them know, like, hey, something's wrong with your device. You may want to upgrade it or check it out or what have you. So we spend a lot of time with our customers, whether it be just a regular consumer all the way up to the largest enterprises in the world, making sure we're securing them and our networks.
And to talk one of the larger ones, and you spoke recently about the work you did with the VA Palo Alto healthcare system. And I just want to use that as sort of an example. You launched full spectrum private 5G network. What does that actually look like for the veteran walking in the front door? How does that impact their care, having that connectivity?
It's been a great partnership with the VA. And this is where I think 5G is going to go. We're really in the early stages of 5G kind of technology and what we call mobile edge compute. So private 5G is you can have your own kind of your own 5G network in your place of work. In this case, it'd be, say, a hospital. But then you could also have the compute sitting right next to it. So it's not going up into a big cloud somewhere where you don't know, but the compute can happen right on-prem. And for vets, what it's really about is how do we use this technology to make it easier for doctors to help them, right? And then also, how do we make their lives easier when they're in the hospital? A derivative of that is a lot of vets won't even come into a hospital and they'll be in a remote location. How do we use 5G and this kind of technology so we can get to them and provide them service remotely? So this is kind of what we're trying to do. But in the case of security, what you'll find is, and you Gen AI and all this stuff, it's the big buzzwords. But these kind of things, you need to be if you're going to use this kind of technology, you got to be ultra secure, and you got to make sure you understand where your data sits, you understand what's going out and what's staying, let's say on premises. And when you have your compute sitting right there along with the private network, you can manage the security posture yourself. And so this is going to be, I think, a pretty big attribute going forward, where they don't want their data going out into a big cloud. They want to make sure they're controlling the flow of it. So kind of a nuanced answer there. But really, the work with the VA is great. We're bringing the same work to other hospitals. The healthcare industry needs some help in modernizing and driving efficiencies. And we're working with a lot of great hospitals and care providers to use this technology. And that's the way I think of 5G too, Peter. It's a platform. So we put out the platform, and then we work with others in the ecosystem to how can we use this platform to do better for people? And that's generally what it's all about.
After the break, Colin and I will turn our attention to the future of Verizon and the technology it's bringing customers, both with 5G and beyond. We'll be right back after this.
Shopify Editions is back with over 100 product updates and enhancements all in one place. Explore our latest solutions for every aspect of commerce, from starting and scaling a business
so you can sell everywhere easier,
to flexible components for enterprise needs.
Businesses can choose which technologies they need to create the customer experience they want.
And developer tooling to customize any commerce experience.
We know how important it is to offer the right mix of power, flexibility, and customization across our surfaces.
No matter what you're building, you can build for the long term with Shopify. Visit shopify.com/editions.
Welcome back. Before the break, Kyle Malady, Executive Vice President and CEO of Verizon Business, and I were talking about the evolution of telecommunication and his career. A few weeks ago, you headed out to the Mobile World Congress, which I believe was held in Las Vegas. What was the message that you wanted to bring the industry there?
For me, listen, my message is more in that context about what Verizon Business can do for our customers, right? So talking to customers and partners out there, hey, what can we do? What new capabilities can we bring to the market that will really help our customers? And so I actually spent a lot of time on, we just talked about mobile edge compute and private networks, spent a lot of time on that. And then how do we, what use cases can we bring to life that would really be helpful for, say, in manufacturing or healthcare or the like? We spoke a lot there about what we're doing with the coach-to-coach communications in the NFL. And, that's not the high tech that you need to bring to bear, say, in a manufacturing line, in a high-speed manufacturing line. But it kind of just shows the trust, the reliability that we bring. And that's what CIOs want. They want reliability. If the NFL relies on us for their coach-to-coach communication, which is a vital link in the communication chain to run a football game, it's kind of a proof point of what we can do for your operation, even though it's less technical. But spend a lot of time with customers, a lot of time with other partners, application developers, device folks, what the next wave of things are that our customers will want to have in their hands to help their business move forward.
Yeah, and this episode is actually going to come out the day that the Las Vegas Raiders are in Ford Field playing the Detroit Lions. I've been a longtime Verizon customer, and I think the first time I got Red Zone, it was actually a deal that Verizon did with the NFL to my phone.
We actually built the first NFL app, and that's back when I was doing technology and development. We actually built the first NFL app, and sounds like you were an early adopter, Pete.
Speaking of the technology and building that, while you're in Vegas, I believe you unveiled the first transatlantic holographic calling setup. So first place, can you explain that technology to us and how close are we to doing, this podcast in a holographic environment?
I don't know how close we are to this. I've seen holograms. You've seen holograms for quite a long time. I think what we're just trying to portray there is the benefits of the network in terms of the bandwidth and the latency capabilities we have. So that's a really tough use case to do seamlessly. So, I don't know we're going to see a bunch of holographs anytime soon. I mean, I think I saw them in Star Wars 30 years ago. We'll see what the demand becomes, but I think that was just more of a kind of showing off a little bit, right, about the capabilities of the platform, like we said, and what it's capable of. And the intent there is to show people like, yeah, this is hard to do, but our networks are getting to the point like we can do this stuff. So you should start thinking about how do you push the envelope on your technologies or things you'd like to see, and come and work with us, and we'll work on things together.
Yeah, can you kind of put that into scale for us? So, you mentioned when you started out sort of 1G, basically voice over a wire, to what we have today. How much more information can you pack into a 5G network compared to 1, 2, 3, and 4?
It's really the driving force behind the Gs, frankly. How many bits can I force into certain megahertz, and how efficiently can I do it? Because the spectrum is a limited resource. So it becomes how much can you fit in? I mean, if you go back to the analog days in 1G, I think we could basically fit like 24 calls per phase, basically. And now we can do hundreds, right? So that's really the driving force behind the G. So giving you more bandwidth that you can consume. And we didn't have enough bandwidth back in the day to do data very well. But now, that's what most people use. They use the data on the devices, and that's a function of having enough spectrum and then keeping the technology going so you could fit enough bits. But there is something called Shannon's Law, and there is a theoretical maximum of how much you can fit through. And we're getting closer and closer, but we continue to work on technology like a massive MIMO that there's multiple antennas that can really help move that forward as well. But in terms of really what it's all about, is the more bandwidth and latency characteristics of whatever allows us to build, like I said, the new platforms that open up new use cases. And one story I always tell is, when we were moving from 3G to 4G, 3G data was kind of slower and you could do some things on a flip phone, but, it wasn't all that exciting. And when we moved to 4G, the only real data thing we had was like a dongle that you could plug into a computer. That was like it. And it took a little while before you had alternate technologies coming together that really form the LTE ecosystem that we all know is the smartphone kind of thing with the apps and watching video and all those kind of things. But it started with the wireless carriers building the platform that was capable enough to handle the bits that needed to flow through the network to make this happen. And then you started seeing OLED screens. You started to see more snappy processors in the phone. You started to see application. You started seeing higher level OSs. Like all these things came together, but it was quite a while. If you look at it, if you go back and look at it, that these things came together after we started the LTE networks.
And once the environment's there, inevitably people are going to build the things to fill the bandwidth. And one of the things, and you mentioned earlier, and we can't talk innovation in 2023 without touching on it, artificial intelligence. You mentioned how you're using it with the VA. How else are you using it operationally today? And what is the sort of vision for how generative AI will impact your operations, not just within networks, but even how you run the company?
We've been using AI. I mean, AI just didn't hop. What's really happened is Gen AI has come to bear. And then, because of ChatGPT, and all the work that they did on large language models, like ChatGPT's now, like people get their head around, like, wow, that's amazing, right? But it was kind of there before. It was almost like the internet. The internet was there before World Wide Web kind of came around, right? So it's been there, and we've been doing a lot of AI incorporated mainly in our consumer business and helping us manage calls and the like, and doing things like digital twins so we can model out, network events and things like this. But now it's getting on steroids, right? So we have a team of scientists, our own data scientists and engineers that are deeply involved with all of the folks that are, really pushing the tech forward. But we're being careful. We want to make sure if we deploy a technology, we want to understand all of the caveats of it, the good of it and the bad of it. So we're doing a lot of proof of concepts right now. We're working with the leaders in the field, and we will 100% be utilizing it, but we want to make sure we're doing it in a thoughtful way.
I think that's something we don't appreciate is, when we pick up our smartphone and just want it to be fast and want it to be write our term papers, whatever people are using using it for. But, one of the things that when I was preparing for this podcast, I fell down a little bit of a rabbit hole was Open RAN, and something I had not heard of before. And you mentioned sort of the technology that already exists and using it in new ways. I think we're all familiar with the Internet of Things, but can you talk about why this topic is so salient for 5G and for the future of where the industry is headed?
Yeah, there's a lot of debate, and I'll give you my 2 cents on it. I mean, there's still a lot to be defined here. But the way the telecommunication industry's worked for a long time, it's really a standards-based industry. And when you're talking about the radio access network or from the cell site to the device, there's only a few players in the world who build the gear for that. And then therefore, those are the only ones kind of innovating, right? In the future, there's this notion of what we call Open RAN, where the radio access network becomes an open kind of standard and set up a situation where a lot of little guys can play. Right now, if you're a little guy with some technology, it's hard to play in the ecosystem because you need to get your technology approved by the big players and or the standards body. And that's a difficult chore globally. So Open RAN is really the notion of having maybe smaller guys, R&D come, from other places and be able to utilize that in the networks that we have. But it's a hard thing to do because the way the system works now, that's ingrained for decades. And so there's pros to Open RAN. Like one of the theories is it'll really spur more development. Because let's face it, we don't have a Bell Labs anymore. That's gone. So we need to find other ways to generate new research and development, and people need to fund that. But in the meantime, we have the ecosystem that we have in place today. And how do you transition from one method to another method? So there's still a lot of open questions in ORAN. I think there's definitely benefit potential there, but there's also some risks. So we'll see more how this plays out over this is going to be something that plays out over the next 5 to 10 years.
I want to talk about that technology development aspect. You're a technologist at heart. Are you constantly scouring the internet for these sort of up and coming companies that maybe have something that you may be interested in either partnering or acquiring with? I mean, how are you personally keeping on top of it?
We have very close relationships with the biggest tech brands, the tech names but we also have teams of people, that's what their jobs are, is to be out in the world, understanding what's going on. Is there things going on out there that we could leverage? And that's part of the beauty potentially of Open RAN, because right now, if I go find something interesting, If it's deeply rooted in lower layer topology in our network, then I'm back into a standard situation. I can't really, it's hard to implement. Now, we have done it in the past, but it becomes difficult. In an Open RAN world, that might become easier. So that's one thing. But we have the nose to the grindstone all the time looking for what's the next technologies coming out, and usually really early stage.
Yeah, and talk about access and more on a consumer level is fixed wireless access. What role does that have in your growth plans? And also, how does that potentially solve what's been a digital desert problem this country has faced due to the size of it?
Let's face it, the 5G, there was a big hype curve on 5G and what have you. And I think that got overplayed a little bit based on my experience of 4G. Like I said before, it took a while before all these parts come together before something comes out. But fixed wireless access is made possible because of 5G. And that's something like, listen, if you go back to the DSL days, we would love to use LTE to be a broadband substitution for cable 15 years ago. The fact of the matter is the technology wasn't there and we didn't have enough spectrum. But now we can do it, and our NPS scores are so high on our fixed wireless access product for consumer, like we're blowing away the cable guys. And I've read some. I don't know exactly if this is true, but basically, if you look at all of the broadband net adds that have gone on in the last couple quarters, most of them, almost all of the net adds have been fixed wireless access, not the traditional tethered solution. So I think there's a demand for it out there. And I think as we continue to roll out our C-band, we're going to open up more and more areas that people can buy this. And I think we're going to continue to see great success with that moving forward.
And as you wrap up, you just mentioned, 5G, it took a while to ramp up. We're still probably in the early days of that. Where do you see for your business and the business you oversee, the green shoots for the growth in terms of either technology or bottom line business?
For me, obviously there's capabilities in 5G that are better than 4G for just the basic smartphone. But that's not what we're interested in, right? So in our business segment, we're interested more in other devices, private 5G networks. How do we help businesses do their work much more efficiently, whether it be on a factory floor and securely, whether it be on a factory floor or if you have a mobile workforce now, because let's face it, not everybody's coming back to the office. But if you have a mobile workforce of 1,000 people, it's tough to maintain a security posture on 1,000 laptops and 1,000 smartphones going all over the place. So us doing managed services for companies where we can take that headache off their hands and make sure that everything's secure, up to date. If they lose it, we can get them a replacement quickly. Like things like that to help them move their business. It's not necessarily high tech, but it's about solutions for our customers so we can help them. Then you can get into the more cutting edge things like you talked about VA and managing drones and all that kind of stuff at the higher level. But it's across the board, Peter. So it's like, how do we just help your business with what we have? And then if you have great ideas, how do we help foster that, so you can harness the power of 5G and mobile edge compute? As a matter of fact, later on today, we have a session going on over here in LA where we're bringing a lot of customers together to show them, here's the latest developments in our technology. So so then that'll help inform you as you're developing plans for your infrastructure and your mobile workforce.
You're on LA, you're talking to customers. How often are you getting feedback from them that you're then taking back to your team and maybe developing a new product or a new implementation?
Constantly. It's never ending. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for the feedback. Now, listen, sometimes people come up with things that are like impossible, right? Like the technology is just not there yet. But there's a lot of things, the technology can now support. What's more encouraging to me too is when folks come to me and we actually have solutions and we just might need to tweak this or that, like little tiny tweaks, and they didn't even think it was possible. Those are the ones that are kind of the best. And that's really about how we're out there talking to our customers about what's your pain points, then how do we bring that back? And those are the best for me. When we already have stuff and we could cobble a couple things together and then we could solve their problem, they're mystified. Those are kind of the best ones.
Yeah, and talk about solutions, and we've established 5G is a lot to go, but if you read any reports, they're already talking 6G, some people saying 2030, some people saying 2028. Regardless of when it comes out, how will you and the team of Verizon ensure that the company will be ready to be the first movers into that when the time is right?
We're always on the cutting edge of this stuff, so we're involved in the 6G discussions now. Typically, I guess just an easy rule of thumb is a G comes around like every 8 to 10 years or so, right? And so 5G was getting out. People started working on what capabilities are required in the next G. So, 5G's got a ton of legs. There's so much capabilities. We need to figure out what are the great things we'll do with that. And then while you're building that, figuring out what are the gaps in the 5G standard, and then what do we do with 6G? And I think you'll also see one of the ideas now is O-RAN really shows up in a bigger way in 6G, right? Because now that could be part of the quote unquote standard, if you will. And so that may be where you see O-RAN take off. But there's a lot of different technologies that are in play right now, and we'll see. But generally, I think a good rule of thumb, Peter, is like every 10 years or so, you start seeing the rollover.
That's a good thing. We'll keep an eye out then for that. And so final question before I let you go, talk to your clients in LA. We've covered a lot of grounds. As you're thinking about early 2024, what excites you most about Verizon Business, the telecommunication, 5G, across the board?
Listen, right now, we're at that inflection point now where the 5G stuff is going to start come around, right? So now's the time over the next couple of years where these solutions that we've been working on and doing proof of concepts really start getting legs and start seeing life. So right now for me, it's a super exciting time in my position where I was building 5G networks and doing the technology, and now working with customers to be able to utilize and help their business move forward. So it's a super exciting time for the industry, a super exciting time for Verizon. We're going to continue to push technology on behalf of the American people and our business partners.
As one of those partners, we appreciate it. Thank you so much, Kyle, for joining us.
It's great to be here, Peter. Thank you.
That's our conversation for this week. Our guest was Kyle Malady, Executive Vice President and CEO of Verizon Business, part of Verizon Communication, NYSE ticker VZ. If you like what you heard, please rate us on iTunes so other folks know where to find us. Got a question or comment you'd like one of our experts to tackle on a future show? Email us at icehouse@ice.com or tweet at us at icehousepodcast. Our show is produced by Ken Abel with production assistance from Ian Wolf. I'm Pete Ash, your host, signing off from the Library of the New York Stock Exchange. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week.
Information contained in this podcast was obtained in part from publicly available sources and not independently verified. Neither ICE nor its affiliates make any representations or warranties, express or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information, and do not sponsor, approve, or endorse any of the content herein, all of which is presented solely for informational and educational purposes. Nothing herein constitutes an offer to sell, a solicitation of an offer to buy any security, or a recommendation of any security or trading practice. Some portions of the preceding conversation may have been edited for the purpose of length or clarity.